Hello, everyone. Right, we are now finally on the last part. There is 9 pages of this filing, which equates to, 9 times 4. um, that's all that's left. So we are just going to get through that. Quiet. I've got Mia with me, so she may be a bit noisy. So, yeah, apologies for that. Okay, let's get through this. So I have obviously talked quite a bit, and in part 8, I started with a kind of like a bit of a preamble about this expert specifically, why I have an issue with her, why I'm not happy with how she's coming across in this deposition. Yes, I know. Again, I did explain that I'm not saying she's not an expert in the field. I'm just saying in this deposition, her skills and experience and knowledge is not coming through. She's not showcasing them, and she is, this is an environment which is meant to test her knowledge and her skills. That's specifically Meryl Gaberski's sole job here, is to discredit her. So she can kind of, in favor of Lively's own expert. And I think she's doing a great job. I do. I did not like Meryl Gaberski and how she was with Perez in Las Vegas, but she may be, she's not as good as Wayne Dennison, but she may be the kind of Wayne Dennison, the more the expert counsel. She's doing a very good job here. It's undeniable. And I'm not going to say that she's not doing a good job just because I support a particular team. And the expert is not doing a good job at all. Absolutely not. So I've already said it. I will say it again for people who may not have seen the other videos where I've talked about it, but that's kind of my position. We've only got 9 pages left. The expert's really got to pull something out the bag now to make me think, okay, yeah, this is going to be a good thing. I will also say though, how she performs at trial is going to be important. Like, it's going to be far more important than this deposition by a long way, because they'll only really use this deposition to impeach what she says at trial. We saw it with Dr. Spiegel in the Depp trial, where, they said to him, well, is it true that you called Mr. Depp an idiot? And he was like, no. And then they literally brought up his deposition transcript and said, took him to the line where he specifically said, he referred to Johnny Depp as an idiot. And he was like, oh, well, yeah, I apologize for that. I apologize for that. And then, so that's how this deposition kind of will be used. But if she's struggling in the deposition, which is usually in like a law firm offices in a conference room, it's an intimidating environment, but it is nowhere near as intimidating as being on a stand in front of the judge, the jury, all the various people in the court, any members of the public who also go. And if you remember correctly, Dr. Hughes, Amber Heard's other expert, she was pulled up specifically because, I can't remember, and she was trying to look at her notes, and she wasn't allowed to look at her notes. She was reading from her notes, and she actually got told, no, you can't do that because you are supposed to remember. You're supposed to be able to recall why you did things, why you said things, why you formed opinions, what the opinions were, what the testing that was used, explain the test as well. And all the way through this, my big problem is this witness is not remembering much at all. And in part 8 in particular, I got the impression that actually they maybe should have been deposing her assistant, because nearly everything so far, apart from the actual final report, seems to have been done by her assistant. And there's a lack of oversight, and then she seems to have just taken everything the assistant's given her and then generated a report based on it that she doesn't understand what she's generating in her report, because she doesn't understand the stuff that her assistant has produced, how her assistant has done things. She's not double checked what assistant has done. So these are These are huge problems. And if they're a problem now in this environment, in a deposition environment, which is a far more relaxed and comfortable environment than the courtroom will be, then it's going to sure as hell be a problem unless they can really fine tune her and tidy her up by the time of the trial. Then she's gonna have a big problem, and it does worry me. Not too much because this is just one expert, and whether this expert performs well or poorly does not prove Amber Heard was sexually harassed or, suffered a smear campaign by Wayfarer. There are other experts as well. Both sides have got more than one expert on the kind of smear campaign side of things. And I was highly impressed by Wayfarer's other expert, James Haggerty, whose report is one of his report is on the docket in full. So I've read it and I loved it. And part of me may be kind of comparing the quality, not the kind of substance of the information, because obviously we've not read Nicole Alexander's report, but she is being questioned on it and struggling. But the quality of James Haggerty's report, by contrast, is excellent, and I was highly impressed. I was blown away even by it. So, go and check out my video. Actually, I done when I was reading through it. I was incredibly impressed. He made some excellent points that I think Lively is going to really struggle to get around. But again, we haven't seen any of her experts' reports, so I've got nothing to compare to. Reading these as standalone, like I say, we haven't seen Nicole Alexander's report yet, but I'm not loving how she is struggling being questioned on it. And we are hearing snippets of it because it's being read in. But she, I don't like this. I think I've summarized that and said that enough. I just don't like how she's coming off. She does seem incredibly underprepared for this. So anyway, let's continue and finish this off. I'm open to changing my mind later on. If her report stuns me, great, but she's still got to testify about that. And that's my worry here is, even if the report is remarkable, it's great, and it's does on paper it looks great for Wayfarer, she still has to get into a courtroom and testify about it. And if she's struggling in a deposition, she is going to definitely struggle in a courtroom. So, that is a concern. Okay, so we finished off here. Gabansky was asking, so what hashtags did you use to scrape TikTok? Alexander says, so we would not have used hashtags. I would have to go back into the dataset to see if this is the appropriate scraper or if it's a different one. So when you listed a TikTok hashtag crawler, it's your testimony that you did not actually ask it to crawl certain hashtags. Objection. No. So some hashtags come with the data, but the point of data analysis was not to specify a hashtag, so it shouldn't have been this particular scraper. How would I determine what scraper you used if it's not the scraper that you listed in your materials? So I would have to check the output data, but we did not use we did not use hashtags. We identified the keywords that I mentioned in my report. So it would have to be a scraper that was not a hashtag only. See, and this stuff like this bothers me a lot. Like, she's mentioning stuff in her report. When she's been asked about it, she's like, yeah, no, I don't know why we used that. Or no, we didn't use that one. Or when we used the latest version of Bert, but I don't know what that is. And you should be able, for people to think, oh, well, it's just obvious. It's just the latest one. Just go and look. No, in this environment, and when you're being deposed, and this is evidence in legal proceedings, you specify which one. It's not a case of saying to, the opposing counsel, it's just the latest one, at the time of this report, and that's enough. That's not enough. That's not evidence. So whilst it sounds like it's being pedantic, and it is, but that's the kind of the bar of, legal evidence. She should be able to identify all of this without too much of an issue. Okay. So, Gabernsky. Okay, so let's go to Exhibit 22, which is your TikTok input data, and we'll mark this as Exhibit 22. Okay, I don't know. Let's look at rows 3 and 4. That looks like the exact same post, right? Rows 3 and 4? Uh-huh. Yes. Why did your data include 2 of the same posts? Let's look over the timestamp. Let's scroll over. We can look at all the columns to see that they are all the same. I'm not sure why there's a duplicate. See, why is she not picking up this stuff before she's submitting it in a report? I'm not sure why there's a duplicate, but it could be from translation. It could be from, I'm not sure. Okay. Each post should be a unique post. It should be. Why is that? So again, it may be a unique post. It may be an identical post. So it could have been from 2 different, and then the witness is reading. I don't see any differentiation across any of the columns, so I'm not sure why it shows up twice. Okay, let's go to 31 and 32. These are the same 2, right, as each other? Yes. Do you have any idea of how many of the entries in your TikTok data are actually duplicates? I don't know. Isn't it important for you to know that? Yes. Now I'm getting annoyed now. Yes, this is important. Why is she not? This is clearly important stuff that she has not taken the care to check before submitting this report. And it is bad. Fritz objects. It's not necessarily important. I'm not even an expert, and I'd love her to know. At this point, and as a lawyer, I would be like, okay, tell me why it's not important, because it sounds kind of important. If anyone in the comments knows why this would not be important, I'd love to hear, because I like to learn about stuff as I'm going through this. But the reason I'm challenging this, and she's about to explain why it's not important, I'm sure, in this lengthy part, but she's just said a minute ago when asked about the previous 2 identical posts, I don't know why that's there. So how is she able to say at that point, well, it's not important? I hope that makes sense. Like, if I'm coming at this from a legal mind and I'm in like questioning her, I would be saying, even if she gave me an elaborate explanation of why, in her opinion, it's not important, I would be referring her back to her previous comment. You just said it wasn't, you didn't know why they're duplicated. So how can you be, so confident that this is not important? Okay. So, Nicole Alexander, right? So she says it's not necessarily important because, again, as I'm pulling them from the scraper or from the API, TikTok is looking at these as individual entries, which is why they're on individual rows, assuming on the conversion process from the file that I submitted. So they may be duplicative. But if you were to back out why they show up twice, the assumption is that they would show up twice on 2 different accounts. Okay, so let's assume hypothetically that every single one of your TikTok videos is in here twice. That would mean that your data set of TikTok videos is not actually 688, it's 688 divided by 2, right? Based on the assumption that you just outlined? Yep. Based on your assumption, that's one way of calculating, yes. Okay, let's go to what we will mark as Exhibit 23, which will be the YouTube README. You should have Exhibit 23 now. Yes. And you see that this says 16,337 comments. Do you see that? 1,789 comments? 16,337 comments, right? This is YouTube analysis. YouTube analysis on the screen. Oh, at the top it says 16,337. Yes. Okay, that says comments, not videos, right? This says comments, yes. So your YouTube analysis looked only at comments. I would have to go back into the data to see how it was collapsed. So if it looked at comments only, or if each line had a comment along with any additional metadata or data from the videos. But that would be in your input files, right? No, not necessarily. What do you mean? So if I classify something as a post on Instagram, you can interpret that as one post, or as some of the images that you showed me, there was one post, but there were multiple frames that you have to analyze. So depending how the data, what is available to be extracted with the data, it could show information for that one Instagram post that you show. As I mentioned, there were like 5 different tabs. So it could also give information for those different tabs. So wouldn't that be in the Excels that you produced to us? No, it should. If it was available, it should. So that was my question. If you pulled more than the comments, that would be reflected in the input Excel that you provided us. In the dataset, yes. Okay. And if, let's go down to results. Well, actually, we can start with what it calculates. It shows 85 comments per month for the May to July, 1,789 comments for August, and 445 for September. Do you have any reason to think that those numbers are inaccurate? No, I don't believe they are. I believe they're accurate. Okay. And then in results, it again says spike is absolutely massive. And in the second paragraph, it says, as she reads, same time and issue as all other platforms. Movie came out August 9th. Alleged campaign August 2nd. Can't definitively say which caused it. Right? Yes, I'm reading that. Then it says, then there were additional spikes in January, February when lawsuit was filed, and October 2025, which shows that volume correlates with newsworthy events, supporting organic explanation. Do you see that? I do. Is that your opinion, or is that Miss Hunter's opinion? Because, everything seems to have been done by Miss Hunter so far. Fritz objects. So that's an inference that Miss Hunter made. It's an inference that I've also made in addition to that. Okay, so what is your basis for understanding that spikes in January and February and October were related to newsworthy events? So based on the data, we saw that there was the spike initially in August, and then in December, around the time of filing the lawsuit, there was additional spike. So you didn't consider any other events that occurred in December that could have caused that spike? I didn't find any other data that highlighted other key news cycles that would be able to be considered. In your dataset, correct. You didn't go out and look for other explanations? No, I didn't actively look at macroeconomic factors. Okay, let's look at the input for your YouTube, which should be exhibit 24. This is your underlying YouTube data, right? Yes, this looks like the CSV. Okay. And so column B shows the timestamp. You see it starts with May 16, right? Yep. Okay. And let's go over to column 1. You see search term. So that reflects the search terms that you used in YouTube, right? That is a search term that is used with the scraper, yes. Yeah, so why? Well, a scraper, you didn't use a scraper, you used the YouTube data API, right? With the API. Okay, so why does this spreadsheet have a search term and your other spreadsheets don't? It would be the way we were able to extract the file itself. So if you didn't actually use search terms with the other scrapers, could that also be an explanation of why there is not a column that says search terms? No, the output of the files is dependent on the parameters that either a scraper or an API gives you back, so you wouldn't add or remove anything. So if we go to, there is a video, ID column F, and a title of the video in J. Do you see that? Yes, column F, yes. And J, do you see that? Yes. Okay. And I just want to say, because someone made a comment during my live, I think, that some other content creators are not criticizing. I guess that's not the right word, but they're like, oh my god, they keep asking the questions such as, "Do you see that right?" So many times, like I think it was counted, like there was just loads and loads, hundreds of times that Meryl asked the question, "Do you see that?" They have to do this if they're showing her an exhibit or something like that. They have to put it in front of her, and then they have to check that she has seen it, because otherwise, if they don't have it on record that she has seen it, then it can be a dispute later on, which can have the testimony kind of struck. So Meryl Grabinsky is going to take great care that when she is putting an exhibit in front of this expert or any witness, right? Because it happens in every deposition. All counsel are doing it as well. This is not just Meryl Grabinsky. When you put an exhibit in front of your witness and you take him to it and you say, right, like, read this line 56, whatever. It says this, and this. Do you see that, right? And you need to get that yes on record, as in this transcript. Yes, I see it. Because then the witness cannot then later say, well, yeah, they put it in front of me, but they didn't give me time to read it. Or, no, she didn't show me it. It is here. There's a documented record. So whilst it sounds mundane and repetitive, and it absolutely is, it is essential. There is a purpose behind it. It's not just being, extra. I just wanted to clarify that. Like, if I can clarify some of the kind of the legal etiquette as I'm going through this, I'm going to do that. So whilst non-legal commentators and content creators may kind of sort of find it amusing, or like, well, what the hell is she doing here? There is method to the madness, and there is a reason why these things are done this way. Okay. Yeah, so here we are. So back to Meryl. Okay. And you see the video title for, gosh, everything on the screen right now is It Ends With Us official trailer, right? For video title, yes. Yeah, so who picked this video? I'm not sure what you mean, who picked the video? Well, who picked to analyze this video? So all this data come back based on the keywords and the time that we provided to YouTube's API. So, Autumn, can you copy the video ID here? I have no idea what that means. The DLetU31, can you copy that? And then can you do a filter for that? If you go to the, yeah, perfect. Oh no, you just took it away. Thank you. And go to video ID and let's look for that one. Autumn, if you just go, wait, Autumn, can you just go out of this, just go to the top, the arrow on F, the arrow on F right there, and paste it right here under search. Okay, and then do okay. By the way, all of that will not be like that. Sounds like a complete word salad when you put it all together like that, but it would have been kind of pauses in space. It's just the court reporter, the stenographer, is just taking down what is being said in order of it being said, but it's not necessarily like a flowing conversation. But it sounds ridiculous when I read it like off a transcript like this. Okay, so we're still with Meryl Grabinsky. So do you see on the bottom left, Miss Alexander, it's 200 of 16,337 records. 200? Yes, I see that. So why are there exactly 200 comments to this trailer? Objection. I wouldn't know why there is 200 comments on a trailer. Do you know whether you could have collected all of the comments to this trailer? Objection. So we collected what was available via the keywords that we entered and the time frame. This is the data set that was given back from the API. Okay, Autumn, let's get Exhibit 25, which is the post that matches what we just looked at, the It Ends With Us trailer. And how many comments do you see in this document? In total, let's see, 8,582 comments. Okay, so why does your dataset only include 200 of them? There's one of the possible reasons is because there is a maximum amount of comments that are available via the API. I'd have to go back to YouTube's API to just double check that, but there's usually a maximum. It could also mean that at the time that was all that was available. I mean, I'm not sure of the specific reason why. That's a pretty big difference between 208,000. Wouldn't that 208,000? Wouldn't that be important for you to understand? Objection. So wouldn't if the 200 is a randomized sample of the 8,352? Well, how do you know whether the 200 is an accurate sample of the 8,000 posts? All I can say is that based on the API, that is the data that we would have received from the scraping from providing those keywords. So I would assume that there is a maximum. I would have to go into, I'm not as familiar with YouTube's API, but I would have to confirm and why it would cut off. But the likely assumption is that there are sometimes maximum amounts of downloads that you could get. And I'm assuming it was cut off at 200, which is why it's a specific number. Well, I don't understand why you have to assume that if this is your report and your search. Again, I think this is very fair comments from Meryl. Objection. Why don't you know whether the API that you used was capped at 200 comments? That's not knowledge I readily have available. Who would have that knowledge readily available? Objection. Miss Hunter? Google. No, Google. Okay. YouTube. And you didn't think it was important for you to understand that? Objection. I don't think that it would change the analysis. I mean, I'm no computer expert, but my dad is, and I am actually struggling to rationale why this would not have had an impact on the analysis. Okay. Are you aware of how many people viewed this trailer? Are you aware when the trailer came out? No. Are you aware that the trailer came out during the baseline period? I wasn't until you just mentioned it. Wouldn't that affect your analysis of what the appropriate baseline period is? It could have an effect, yes. It could actually make the baseline higher. Wouldn't the baseline need to come from a period that didn't include a film-related event? Objection. Not necessarily. So ideally, a baseline should be of a non-statistically significant news cycle or period of time without any large media cycles. So if, as you said, this come out during that period of the baseline, that would actually increase, assumingly, my overall baseline and not lower it, which would then mean the spike subsequently, again, assumptions that the spike subsequently wasn't as high from the baseline as I originally thought. Okay, let's look back at the YouTube rows 2 through 7, and you see rows 2 and 3, 4 and 5, 6 and 7, 8 and 9, 10 and 11, 12 and 13. I mean, all the way down. They're exact duplicates, right? They're counted twice. Objection. So, duplicate, I just want to clarify. Fritz says, I don't think there is a question pending, so just note my objection. There was. My question was, these are exact duplicates, right? Fritz, okay, you can answer that. I don't know if they are exact duplicates. My God, why not? Why do you not know this? I will say that the content appears to be the same. There could be different reasons for that. It could be the same user posted twice. That's still a duplicate, though. There could be, I don't know, possibly other reasons. Okay, but posted twice at the exact same time. I'm not sure what caused this. And do you know how many pieces of data in this YouTube dataset reflect duplicates? I do not. Okay, let's go to row 344, which is from August 9th, and you start seeing comments saying, and she reads, Justin Baldoni is a huge part of this movie and deserves to promote it as much as Blake Lively does. Do you see that? We can expand this so you can see it. Do you see that? Yes. How would your sentiment analysis... Actually, Miss Lively's name doesn't appear in this. Oh, yes, it does. Okay, as much as Blake Lively does. So how did your sentiment analyzer categorize this text? I mean, this post. I would have to go back and refer to the number that it gave this post. Okay, let's go to row 353, and it says, and she reads, Justin deserves more spotlight. How... Miss Lively is not mentioned in that post. How would your analyzer categorize this statement? Objection. The classifier should put that in either null or neutral. Okay. How many of the posts that we're looking at here in your YouTube data should have been classified as null or neutral? I can't answer that offhand. I would have to go into the data to look. The data that you didn't provide us? Or this data specifically and go through each one? Okay, well, let's do that. How do you know this one? How do you know how this one was categorized? So I could replicate that as you could by putting the data into the classifier that's accessible and seeing the output on what the score is. Was this one of the posts that you manually checked? I do not know. Okay, I think we can pause right now. I'd like to go off record. So they go off record. Meryl says, John, can you tell me how much time we've been on record? Sure. Off the record, it's 7:42. And then they come back at 7:49 p.m. We don't hear how much time they've been off record because that's clearly told whilst that's clearly discussed whilst they're off record. So, Meryl. Ms. Alexander, your report says you performed a network structure analysis. Is that right? Yes. Have you... Well, what are your notes? I'm sorry, what are my notes? Nodes. Nodes. Oh, I'm sorry. So the nodes that I used for the analysis are from Google. Sorry, there's a word associated with it. What are you looking at right now, Miss Alexander? I'm looking at my report. Okay, where in your report does it describe your nodes? On page... Actually, so it doesn't describe it in the report itself. Okay, so how would I know what your nodes were? I would have to go back into the data set that I provided you in the README file. I'm not sure where I included it. You didn't produce any work product relating to your network structure analysis. So that's not necessary to replicate the data. Well, you just described that the nodes would be located in a README file, but you didn't produce to us with the README file, right? I would have to check the data. It's the data file. The data folder itself. If they are not in there to carry out, that's not necessary to reproduce it. So how would we know what nodes you used? So unless I'm fine-tuning the nodes themselves, you can use any nodes outside of Google or any other third party in order to look at a similar analysis. And what are your edges? I don't know without looking. Okay, so you wouldn't know unless you looked at the data, correct? Okay, and you conducted a time series forecasting, right? That's in the report, yes. But you didn't use your BERT sentiment analysis for purposes of the time series forecasting, right? No, I did not. Why didn't you? Because BERT does its best job on looking at natural language processing versus forecasting. I used it for the sentiment analysis specifically. What is your basis for that statement about BERT being best used for the way you used it, but not for the time series forecasting? BERT was built to be a natural language processor. It has a myriad of data that backs it up for contextualization, tonality. It's an industry standard for use. But why wouldn't you? Well, what did you use for your sentiment time series forecasting sentiments? I used just the forecasting. I used a regression model and a forecasting technique. How did you identify the sentiment of the post for purposes of your time series forecasting? I took it from the sentiment, the aggregate sentiment of the output of BERT. Oh, so you did use the BERT outcome for purposes of the time series forecasting as the baseline for sentiment, but the forecast itself was done with a regression model. Okay, so you did not use a keyword-based classification for your time series forecasting. For my time series with the spike and without the spike, that's a specific chart in my report. The baseline is the outputs of BERT, which is a classifier, and I used a regression model forecasted with the spike and without the spike. And so when in your report you describe using 20 positive keywords and 20 negative keywords, how did you use those keywords? So those keywords are still the keywords based on the inputs that I provide in my report. Those keywords were the ones that I used consistently for the scraper across the APIs and were part of the aggregate of the data that came out of the classifier. And I used that into the regression model. Well, you have specific keywords here. You say positive keywords like love, amazing, talented, support, and then negative keywords like hate, terrible, toxic, boycott. So it's your testimony that you use those terms in your BERT analysis. So I pulled out the major cluster of, based on volume, I pulled those out and I instructed the system to give me a sentiment score based on those keywords, based on the input from the BERT model or BERT classifier. I then conducted a regression analysis. So why didn't you just use the sentiment scores from the BERT model that we discussed earlier? Because the total sentiment was an aggregate, so I needed more granular information than the aggregate scores. But you testified earlier that you could look at the specific scores for each post. And in a subsequent question that you asked me was why I did not give that as an output. One of the reasons is because it was difficult to get the data on a sub-aggregate level out of BERT in order to do the analysis. So I understand. Sorry, go on. So I use specific keywords. Okay. So your time series forecasting depends on both, as an initial level, the BERT sentiment classifier and keywords from the BERT sentiment analysis. So it's the sentiment scores, the keywords that I provided, and then outside of that, the final step is to do a forecast. Okay, so if I wanted to recreate what you just described, how would I do that? So in order to recreate the forecast with the spike and without the spike, you were able to go into the dataset I provided and Python code, and you should be able to replicate it based on everything I provided. So what, just go to what I provided and follow that? Well, you didn't provide us with all of your positive and negative keywords, but it's not based on all of the positive and negative keywords. So if you take the output from BERT, which is the classifier, and it provided aggregate sentiment scores, I used that as a base. Outside of that, I also looked at keywords that were associated with the sentiment, and I provided a forecast and a counterfactual. So if we wanted to recreate, how would we find the complete list of the keywords that you used? You don't need the complete list of keywords in order to recreate it. But I get this, right? But why, if it's 20 positive and 20 negative, why should you just not provide in the keywords? It feels like her report is just a trust me bro report. Like, she's providing as much evidence and detail to back up what she's put in her report as Blake Lively is to back up her allegations of sexual harassment and a smear campaign. And it is actually now starting to piss me off, because we are 2 pages away from the end of this, and I where I should be learning about all of this stuff, like, as you know, someone listening in, I should be learning something through the questions that are being asked. And I've learned nothing. I persevere. Right, so we're with Nicole Alexander. You don't need the complete list of keywords in order to recreate it. So if you go into the files that I provided, you should be able to see the details in the dataset and read me files. Who came up with the list of keywords? For that specific, for the forecast and the counterfactual? Uh-huh. I believe that was me. Okay, so do you have that list? I would have to look at my data folder. Do you have a data folder of the zip file that I provided to council? Okay, so you're saying that the data file you provided us should include the list of keywords you used. It should provide you with everything you need to replicate. That wasn't my question. Objection. Does the data you provided us include the list of all the keywords you used? I would have to look to see if that is included. How did she not know this? Okay, so how often have you created a regression model? How often? Yes. So a regression analysis I've done at Ipsos as well as at Nielsen as part of leading the Basis team, which is a product we use on a daily basis for clients. So how often did you create a regression? I probably did regressions or checked regressions that my team did on a weekly basis. Okay, your report lists certain documents, including Miss Lively's discovery responses. Did you personally review all of her responses to the interrogatories? The last word was interrogatories? Yep. I'm not sure what you mean. What? You would have reviewed all of this. In your exhibit Appendix C, it states that you reviewed Ms. Lively's third amended responses and objections to a set of interrogatories. It lists 4 documents. I'm wondering if you reviewed personally all of those interrogatory responses. I would have, yes. I went through the files meticulously. But you didn't, but you don't know what it means. Okay. I went through everything that was provided. Okay. And did you review the underlying materials that are referenced in the interrogatories? I'm not sure I reviewed the underlying materials. No, well, you just said you reviewed everything meticulously. I think me and Nicole Alexander have different definitions of meticulous. That is what I've learned so far. Okay. What was your response to parts of the interrogatory that discussed how the defendants boosted contents on social media? I don't recall the data or the context that you're referring to. Okay. Well, what is your reaction to understanding that the defendants communicated about boosting social media? Objection. So I read through. I recall some of the claims, but I can't remember if it was in that report, if it was part of Dr. Maislin's and Dr. Humphrey's report, and them referencing it. I can't tease out the difference between where the information came from in my mind. Okay, well, Ms. Lively's interrogatories included multiple pages of quotes from direct emails and communications amongst the defendants. Do you remember reviewing those? Not offhand. That's a surprise. I remember some of it, but again, I'm not sure if it's from the report or I'm not sure if it's from the amended or from Dr. Maislin and Dr. Humphreys. Okay, so in one of the communications, they talked about successfully shifting the narrative online. Did you consider that communication? The communication, no, that was not part of my consideration. So the goal that I went into with analyzing was to look at it without assumptions or applied assumptions, to look at the data set from a clean perspective. John, how long have we been, so Fritz interjects, and John, how long have we been on the record? Meryl says, well, we can go off the record if you want to get a check of the time. The videographer doesn't go off record and says 7 hours exactly. Gavensky says, was his question included in that? Okay, I have one final question. Are we still on the record, John? Yes. One final question. So, when you said you wanted to look at the data without considering the external materials, you then did not consider any of the communications amongst the dependents when you were reaching your conclusions. I'm not sure I understand the question. Are you talking about the underlying data that was, or the material that is referenced outside of the actual amended itself? I'm talking about in the interrogatory, the specific quotes over multiple pages from email communications and text communications amongst the defendants. So I'm sorry, you keep using the word interrogatories, and that's not something I'm familiar with. So I read through the amendment from Ms. Lively. If you're referring to references of emails or I don't know any content that was not in that amended document, then no, I probably did not review and or consider it. Okay. I'm going to keep this deposition open and seek relief from the court to have an additional 30 minutes of time given how the deposition started. Autumn then interjects, can we claw back Exhibit 26? We didn't get to it. I think it expired my ability to pull it back. The stenographer says, oh, that's a something. I'm not quite sure. That's a Maggie question. Is that what she's saying? Yeah, that's a Maggie question. Oh, so there's a little bit from between the lawyers and the technicians now. The technician says, I think that can be done. I won't be able to do that right now. I also don't have access to that because of the time that's elapsed, but we can figure that out. Okay. So this is Gavronsky. Okay, I will send an email. The stenographer, thank you. Gavronsky, okay. Well, Miss Alexander, we may be back here at least for some time, so we will work to schedule that promptly. Fritz says, and the record should reflect we proposed an additional 5 minutes to avoid judicial intervention, and that was rejected by Miss Lively's counsel. Very generous, he offered 5 minutes. The stenographer, and counsel, do we need that part with the judge earlier on that court call? Do we need that transcribed with the same transcript? Merrill said, it should be transcribed, but it can be its own separate transcript. We probably need to then provide that to the court. Stenographer says, okay. Merrill says, okay, thank you. And then they go off record. Wow, that was a lot. So we have actually finished the deposition. Thank God. That was a lot. So in amongst all the stuff she doesn't know, can't recall, didn't do because her assistant did it, there was also a lot of stuff in there that was duplicated as well, which she didn't pick up. I am exasperated with this witness, if I'm being completely and utterly honest. I don't know how other content creators aren't talking about this. It's the thing is, right, is the stuff that goes on between the council, the bickering, right, that's the sideshow. It's important, and yes, it's useful to watch, it's funny, it's entertaining for sure. It's amusing for people like me as well to see how, other legal experts are, what they talk about and how they handle certain situations. And there are things that both sides, the council, did not handle well. Okay. In this deposition, I don't think Gavronsky handled everything very well, but I also think there were things that certainly Friedman and to an extent Fritz did not handle well either. That's not me falling out of love with anyone. That's not me, changing sides. That's me just saying, do you know what? I've read it, I've looked at it, I've listened to it, and yeah, I'm not in love with the way that this was. This council spoke, or this person, what they did, how they handled certain things. And that's just being very, very honest. As I've always said I would do, right? If it meant giving flowers to Lively side because it did something well, I will do that. Because otherwise I'm just, I'm sitting here with disingenuous purposes. But the main reason for reading this stuff is because I want to see how the witness is performing, right? So, we can look at what the counsel does, yeah, okay, that's interesting and entertaining to a point, it's even comical even in this case. But the important thing is like the weaknesses in how the witness is performing, and they are glaring. You know, it's not little bits here and there. She struggled nearly the entire way through 7 hours of deposition. An expert should not be doing that. They should not. Um, and it's troubling. It's really troubling, and I think more content creators should be kind of talking about this, and maybe people don't want to. So they either don't find it interesting, or don't want to highlight that Wayfarer have actually got a weakness, in terms of this expert. But it's important to look at everything. Lively, we haven't seen Lively's lot, so we don't know. We're assuming they're strong. They may not be strong. They may not. But I'm not going to pretend that this witness has been amazing and is going to be, great for Wayfarer. I don't think she is. So, but yeah, thank goodness we're through that. That's nearly 9 hours of recording just to read through this. It's a 7-hour deposition, but like I know that some other content creators have done read throughs of this as well. But like there's been 3 or 4 people on a live stream doing it, whereas I'm just one person reading the part of everyone. So it took a little bit of time. And I also wanted to take my time anyway. I'm not rushing through this. And I know a lot of people who've stuck with me and come and watched every single part with me. And I really appreciate those people. I appreciate anyone watching any of the parts with me, actually. But, for the people who have been here and stuck with me for every minute of this, thank you very much. It's a lot to do, but it's also important to do it. And I wanted to get this done before we're about to get a massive drop of stuff being unsealed, possibly next week or the week after, and I absolutely want to get this out of the way and give myself a couple of days for my sore throat to recover. My chronically sore throat these days with all this reading. But if you're going to read these lawsuits and do it properly and do it justice with with a genuine intent to learn, you have to read everything, even the boring bits. So, stick with it always, because you learn so much. You learn so much. And like with me, where I can say, oh, well, that's not right, or that's not normal, or, this is happening, like the questioning, do you see that question? Being able to say, whilst I'm actually reading those questions, oh, yeah, this is normal, because other people are saying it's not normal. That is where you learn a lot of stuff. And it's well worth doing and investing. All right, guys, I am going to call it a night, and I will see what, if anything. I think we've got something from the Harco insurance company. So I will probably deal with that next, I think, and try and check out some of the side lawsuits. I'll have a look as well, see what's going on with the Travis Flores estate case against Friedman's firm. Again, I think that's a really important lawsuit. So, it's not just what's going on this docket. There are many, 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 many dockets that all kind of have ties and connections, and they're all important. All right, guys, have a great evening, though. I will probably do something on the Harco opposition for tomorrow, I think. I'll probably do it tomorrow.